When we're young, we frequently believe that we have all the time in the world. We're less conscious about wasting time because we think, I still have plenty of time to figure everything out, and I'm sure the answers will arrive, eventually. Another component of youth is the feeling of perceived invincibility, that we can essentially do anything and emerge unscathed, or without suffering any negative repercussions later in life. Obvious examples of this phenomenon include repeatedly performing intense athletic endeavors without adequate rest, or becoming habitually intoxicated while partying on the weekend. An old saying remarks that you should, quote, enjoy your youth, end quote. And while the implications are unique to each person, the second part of this phrase evidently states, quote, while you have it, end quote. Indeed, because youth doesn't last forever and eventually it fades away with the passage of time. Despite this fact, youth itself is a blessing because although you haven't figured everything out yet, there's great potential. Great potential to achieve your ambitions while you have plenty of time, energy, and the drive to do so. Furthermore, you generally have more opportunities when you're young, at least compared to older people who have greater responsibilities and burdens to shoulder, like caring for dependents. Nevertheless, although youth is a blessing, it can also be a curse, especially when circumstances aren't proceeding well and the path forward is uncertain. Today's video provides an analysis of the blessing and curse of youth. This paradoxical nature will be revealed through a brief examination of teenage angst, existentialism, present economic circumstances, and some personal reflection. To begin, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines angst as, quote, a feeling of anxiety, apprehension, or insecurity, end quote, with the provided example evidently being teenage angst. Indeed, this typically comes to mind when we think of angst, where it's personified as a teenager who's apprehensive about the future and uncertain of which direction they wish to go in terms of education, career, and other general life goals. Teenage angst certainly isn't a new phenomenon and it has affected each generation to varying extents. It has also been depicted in entertainment mediums such as music, films, and TV shows. For example, the animated movies Surf's Up and Treasure Planet both contain characters who experience teenage angst. Cody Maverick and Jim Hawkins, respectively, are the two protagonists of each film. In addition to struggling to determine the true extent of their identities, who they are, what they stand for, and who they wish to become, both characters grew up without a father. This dimension evidently adds to the notion that they have something to prove, that they can become something better and rise above the perception from others that they're delinquents who aren't going anywhere. Fortunately for both protagonists, despite having absent fathers, there are father figures who serve as role models and help guide them in a better direction. Big Z for Cody and John Silver for Jim. The reason I mention these movies and characters is because they serve as notable examples which more or less accurately depict teenage angst in the media. Despite being fictional characters, the struggles Cody and Jim endure are directly relatable to our own, especially when we're young and struggling to navigate through adolescence and young adulthood. Cody and Jim's behavior essentially represents how teenage angst is typically defined and classified in reality. One source from my background research remarks that, quote, teenage angst involves frustration, rebellion, attitude, and an overall irritable outlook on life. It can happen as a result of disappointment in being told no when limits and boundaries are denied, end quote. Meanwhile, another source notes that, quote, symptoms to look out for include feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, decreased interest or pleasure in previously enjoyable activities, changes in energy and/or concentration, a decrease in school performance, and changes in sleep or appetite, just to name a few, end quote. Frustration, rebellion, hopelessness, and worthlessness stand out from the reported symptoms because we have more than likely experienced some or all of these sentiments. On more than a few occasions, I've experienced all four simultaneously. Hence why, when we see characters like Cody and Jim experience these emotions and circumstances, it immediately strikes a chord. Although this component has been addressed to some extent already, where does teenage angst originate? In other words, what causes this sentiment to appear? Not just in teenagers, but young adults as well. This is where the blessing and curse of youth remark comes in. Teenage angst is a symptom of this underlying concept. Teenagers and young adults realize that they haven't been around as long as older people. Despite this fact, that of being younger and not having as much time to establish themselves, they often think that they should be doing more. The road ahead should be clear. They should be able to figure it out and establish a solid foundation in life sooner rather than later. However, they eventually discover, like we all do, that life doesn't work that way. The road isn't always smooth because there are setbacks, hurdles, and roadblocks that hinder our progress. We may have expectations as to how we would like our journey to proceed, but sometimes these expectations don't align with reality. As people grow older and become more aware, usually in the late teens, the reality of our world begins to set in. The harsh and brutal nature, and so, this fact influences teenagers and young adults. The necessity to establish oneself becomes clear, to choose a viable path and become successful. Because this doesn't happen overnight and it takes much longer than we expect, this is where the angst arises. The feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, frustration, and rebellion, among others, are direct manifestations of expectations that don't align with reality. The blessing of youth is that you have plenty of time, energy, and potential compared to someone much older, but the curse of youth is the fact that you haven't sufficiently established yourself yet and you must, therefore, painstakingly navigate an uncertain path to get there. Potential is simply potential until it's actualized. You have the potential to become a doctor or a lawyer, for example, but until you tangibly achieve those objectives, they're simply dreams or unactualized potentials. This causes angst in of itself, where you possess dreams and feel guilty for not doing more to achieve them. Another phenomenon that causes angst is indecision, particularly regarding where you desire to go and who you want to become. Teenagers and young adults experience this often because they feel the pressure of others to choose a viable path. Pressure from teachers, acquaintances, friends, and parents to choose a viable path that will facilitate success. Parents especially, since they likely have a vision in their mind for who you should become and what you should do. If this vision is misaligned with yours, or worse, in direct opposition, then conflict is inevitable. All of these related factors evidently contribute to anxiety, frustration, and apprehension about the future. With all that said, there's an even more fundamental idea that underlies teenage angst, in addition to the blessing and curse of youth. That idea is existentialism. For the definition, I will once again refer to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which defines existentialism as, quote, a chiefly 20th century philosophical movement embracing diverse doctrines but centering on analysis of individual existence in an unfathomable universe, and the plight of the individual who must assume ultimate responsibility for acts of free will without any certain knowledge of what is right or wrong or good or bad, end quote. Prominent existentialists include Søren Kierkegaard, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus, to name a few. When we remark that someone is having an existential crisis, it evidently comes from existentialism and its tenets. As the above-mentioned definition remarks, the core of existentialism pertains to the inherent uncertainty of existence, how we exist in the world and attempt to navigate through the uncertainty. Common questions with an existentialist bent include, who am I? Who do I want to become? What is my purpose? Why do I exist? What is my identity and what is the meaning of life/existence? Some examples, but I'm sure you get the idea. I should note that I don't intend for this discussion to become a deep dive into existentialism. That will occur at a later point in time. The reason I mention this school of thought is because it's fundamental and directly relates to what I'm discussing. Teenage angst is, at its core, an expression of existentialism, or a profound questioning of existence and meaning. Merely one example, since people of all ages go through existential crises, but it appears to be a near universal experience among youth, no matter the era. In the age of advanced technology, it's becoming more rampant among everyone, youth of course, but also older generations. On a societal level, there's ostensibly a mass sense of hopelessness, despair, and uncertainty. The perennial question, what is it all for, essentially sums up the existentialist despair that has gripped so many people. With all that said, I will conclude with some of my thoughts and personal experiences with teenage angst and existentialism. Even though I'm no longer a teenager, I still experience something akin to teenage angst. Fundamentally, I have always been introspective, and I often joke that I've had many existential crises or that I lost my sanity long ago. My tendency to look inward and inherently question everything often leads to negative thoughts and despair. I have to actively avoid falling into the pitfalls of persistent despair and negative thinking, which I must admit has hijacked my mind rather frequently as of late. My ongoing health issues, doubts about the future, and family drama has only served to compound my angst. To varying degrees, I've felt hopeless, frustrated, and worthless over the years, but it seems to have become a recurring theme once again. Pushing through is arduous sometimes, but it's something that I've grown accustomed to. What else is there to do but keep moving forward? Despite all the questioning and uncertainty, moving forward is essentially the only certainty. I have to keep advancing towards my goals. I have to act and take constructive steps no matter how uncomfortable or painful they might be. The despair will overcome me if I don't act, if I resign myself to the pain and depression that hijacks my mind on certain days. I felt like Cody and Jim on many occasions, uncertain of who I truly am and who I want to become. In addition to the confusion regarding who I truly am and who I want to become, I also have to continually resist external pressures from those around me, my parents especially, because they too have a vision in their minds as to who I should become. The current state of the economy with rising inflation and costs of living also fuels the continued pressure to perform, succeed, and achieve my ambitions. It has been overwhelming at times, but remaining optimistic and hopeful has enabled me to endure. In Logic's song called Buried Alive, he remarks in one line that, quote, I know I'm going to rise even though I've been buried alive, end quote. This line has been a continued reminder of how you must remain optimistic no matter what, and you must maintain hope no matter the circumstances. Even when it feels like it's hopeless to endure, you must carry on until the rain stops, until those better days you have been praying for arrive. Being buried alive is a representative metaphor for being overwhelmed, when the pressure becomes unbearable, when it feels like you can't carry on anymore and you're going to break down. Due to work, school applications, various pressures and expectations, I've felt overwhelmed on more than a few occasions as of late. The blessing and curse of youth, where I have plenty of potential but I'm struggling to reach that potential, has returned to the forefront of my mind. Nevertheless, like Logic remarks, quote, I know I'm going to rise, even though I've been buried alive, end quote. Indeed, I'm going to rise in the sense that I will rise above the pain, pressure, despair, and uncertainty. Rise, and continue to endure, because I cannot become who I want to be without enduring all the obstacles and hardships. I have to prove others wrong, yes, but that's not the main point. Fundamentally, I have to prove to myself that I can achieve what I desire. I have to make all the previous suffering and hardship that I've experienced mean something. Doing otherwise would dishonor my past self and the sacrifices I've already made to get here, in addition to the efforts of those who have supported me along the way. So, youth may be a blessing, or a curse depending on how you perceive it. But so is life, and like many things it comes down to your perception. If you're buried alive, feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about the future, reassure yourself by noting that you will rise above it. Think about the previous occasions where you endured arduous circumstances. Think about the lessons you learned and how your character improved. If you've done it before, then you can certainly do it again. Actively choosing to face the uncertainty and despair, rather than run away, is how you will overcome it. Finally, in Surf's Up, one of the soundtrack's songs is called Drive by Incubus. One line remarks, quote, no matter what tomorrow brings, I'll be there, with open arms and open eyes, end quote. I continually reflect on these words, because they're a representation of endurance, will, and defiance. Indeed, Resisting the despair and pain of existence is how you can turn what initially appears as a curse into a blessing. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing.